A white-haired man asks if the lady is offering to sleep in the same bed with the girl who may have come after him. He tells Nadia Balasite to make no mistake, for he will never do business with Balasite's daughter. The guy angrily says this to the lady, then leaves, slamming the door. Nadia tells Glenn to wait. It is hard and painful for a pampered child to hear such cold words, but for the main character, it is a great happiness. She was so happy. The girl thanked the Marquis and asked him to be sure to keep his word. Nadia was an illegitimate child of the Balasite family. She had a very private life. The girl's sister took out all her anger and pain on her. The woman constantly abused and humiliated her. The father constantly told the girl that she was doing all this for the family. The daughter was his puppet, which he used in every way for the sake of the family. Her fiancé had a hand in the death of the protagonist. I guess God must have thought her life was miserable too. When the lady opened her eyes again, it was back to one day when she was 20. The girl was granted a new, second life. This time, she plans to destroy everyone who brought her to this point. Nadia promises herself that she will live only for revenge. For starters, pretending to be madly in love, she marries the Balasite family's longtime enemy, the Marquis of Winterfelt from the north. The girl thinks that since she is the daughter of his enemy, surely Glenn couldn't sincerely fall in love with her. The protagonist thought that everything worked out the way she planned. Now the protagonist remembers how she stepped down the hallway with her fiancé under her arm. The girl had twisted her leg, and the boyfriend was helping her walk. The girl was worried about the pain in her leg, but something was bothering her more, and that was her fiancé who was too close. In Nadia's mind, she scrolls through the moments when the Marquis was nice to her. The girl assumes the guy might have developed an interest in her. A great war of many years between the kingdom and demons ended with the victory of the kingdom through the efforts of one hero. The people welcomed the savior who ended the war, and his name was Lee Ji-ho. There is a prettier description for him, a warrior from another world, a dragon slayer, and also the fiancé of a jilted girl from the Duchy of Balasite. When the girl married Lord Lee Ji-ho, she didn't look very happy. Their marriage was arranged before Lee Ji-ho became a hero. That's how the whole tragedy started. Nadia Balasite is the daughter of a concubine of the Balasite family, a puppet. As the girl passed by, she heard gossip. The others said they didn't understand why they needed this useless trash. Her relatives said she was degrading the dignity of their family. The protagonist never dreamed that her own father would recognize her, because Nadia was constantly compared to her younger sister, who had been spoiled since childhood. Yes, and the servants also treated her with disdain. But suddenly, she had a chance to gain her father's respect. He asked his daughter to marry Lee Ji-ho. Back then, Lee Ji-ho was a mercenary who had been summoned from another world for the sake of protecting the kingdom. The speed of his development was so fast that it was frightening. Duke Balasite was sure if he tied him to his daughter, it would definitely play into his hands. That's how he got into a fake marriage with Nadia, and they both became Balasite's pawns. As they stood together, the protagonist asked the guy if he was okay. After a moment of silence, he replied that he would succeed and that no one would dare to ignore him. Even though they were forced to marry, Nadia still had hope that one day they would be able to live as husband and wife, until she got trapped. The golden-haired lady came to the jail cell. She opened the door and asked what had happened to her sister. Nadia says that there was a misunderstanding and she can explain everything. The girl asks to call Lee Ji-ho. The sister apologizes and says that there's no way Lord Lee Ji-ho is coming. The protagonist didn't understand what her interlocutor was saying, but she kept talking. She said that since the time Nadia first married him, things have changed dramatically. After all, now he had become the most important man in this country, and his wife could not be someone like her sister. Karain Balasite is Nadia's half-sister. She asks what the misunderstanding might be and says that the girl must have mistakenly thought that she was the one who imprisoned her here. The protagonist can't believe it and says that Karain and her father are involved in everything. At first, she thought it was because of their feud with her half-sister, but the golden-haired lady asks if her sister really thinks so. It is, after all, a major scandal that has spread throughout the secular society. The father and his daughter and the country hero were discussing how to get rid of Nadia. One of them said that there was only one way to give the girl alcohol at the upcoming banquet. She is usually very cautious, so they should put a drug to intoxicate her. After that, they planned to put a hired man to her, and when she woke up, they would call people. The more witnesses, the better. When this happened, people immediately started making a big deal about it, saying that it was very unseemly and that the girl was the daughter of a concubine. They claimed it was shameless. The stepsister asks the protagonist if she knew that Lord Lee Ji-ho suggested the idea. Come to think of it, after that incident, he never visited Nadia. It seemed to the girl that it was because he was disappointed in her, but in fact, he had planned everything by himself. Even marrying her, the daughter of a concubine, he must have considered discrimination in his favor. If the Lord had simply proposed a divorce, the protagonist wouldn't have objected since she's a mere pamphlet, and it was rather silly to hope for anything. Her half-sister argues that his reputation would then suffer as he is a war hero. Nadia asks if her sister has come as she felt sorry for him. Now the guy has become a hero, so. Karain doesn't let the girl finish her sentence and says that she can say whatever she wants. It's her last chance. It's all she has left. The golden-haired woman claps her hands and asks who will accept someone who has been abandoned by her husband because of an affair with another man, who the girl is a bastard child and will not be able to marry anyone but a simple laborer. So she will help her sister just once. She says that her father wanted to let her stay, but Nadia decided to commit suicide because of her feelings of shame. Two men attack the girl and try to plunge her into eternal sleep. The golden-haired lady claims that once the protagonist's name is tarnished by her shameless act, she will be remembered as a girl who knows shame. Nadia thinks that she doesn't want to say goodbye to her life. Will she really end up like this? All her life she has done as her father says, been obedient. As a child, she always watched her stepmother's reaction. She couldn't even breathe without her permission. Her stepsister had taken all the good things away from her, and now the golden-haired lady was saying goodbye to her sister, and with a rash, fake smile, she said she would miss her. After all, the girl ended her life after living only 23 years. The main character thought it would end like this, but when she opened her eyes, she went back to one day when she was 20. Nadia noticed that there was no rope around her neck and wondered how she had managed to survive. In her dark mind, she could definitely feel the dark end of her life enveloping her body. But the girl woke up perfectly healthy in her room. Plus, everything here looked just like it did 3 years ago. She got another chance. A chance to get revenge on her selfish fiancé, the sister who laughed while she was killed, and the father who used her and then disposed of her like some junk. The protagonist stands near a mirror and ponders what other people would choose if they were given a second chance. Maybe they would want to live for love or live a long time in full health. The girl, thinking a little bit, chooses revenge. The maid comes into Nadia's room and says that when she woke up, she should have rung the bell immediately because she could not clean the room because of the shade. She sees that the girl is touching her reflection in the mirror and says that if she touches the mirror with her hands, it will have stains on it. The maid pushes the protagonist away and starts wiping the mirror and angrily rebuking her mistress for not even knowing a simple thing. Nadia was worried that it could all be a dream, but the girl really somehow went back in time. Because this maid is responsible for the cleanliness of her room, before 3 years ago, Karain finished her off. In addition, on the day of the banquet, when the protagonist was captured, she was ordered by Karain to slip her alcohol. She drank it and passed out. It's too suspicious to be called a coincidence. At the time, Nadia didn't realize this trap. She was tricked by her servant. But it's different now. She won't fall for it again. Asked what that look on her mistress's face was, she wanted to tell her something. The brown-haired girl thanks her favor for always cleaning her room and informs her that she will be out. The maid notices that the atmosphere has changed somehow. When Nadia steps out of her room into the hallway, she is greeted by a maid. She states that His Majesty the King has come to see the Duke, and the lady needs to prepare to meet His Majesty. The protagonist does not understand why the king has visited her father. The girl says that it is just in time and she will be ready soon. Nadia meets her father and claims that he called for her. The Duke says his daughter is very late. The girl says she was getting ready in a hurry. She realizes that her father looks at her like she is some kind of lowlife. In the past, she had feared that look and meekly obeyed, trembling with fear. Her father steps further and claims he will tell everything on the way, so she must listen carefully. It will be about the triumphal ceremony. That's why the king has come. His daughter and Karain have to take care of the tea. Also, there will be a question of her awarding Lord Ji Hoda laurel wreath, and she needs to agree to it. Nadia tells her father that she will do it, and in her mind she realizes that the king has come because of the ceremony to celebrate the triumph during the Kalai expedition. Holding such ceremonies is a long tradition. It involves a girl of married age placing a laurel wreath on the hero for whom the ceremony is organized. In other words, a declaration of love. The problem is that at this ceremony, one of those being honored is a northerner, which means he is the worst enemy of the South. The girl realizes that's probably why the king wants to shift the focus to something else by letting her give the wreath to Li Ji-ho. They want to tie the lord to her through marriage. Even if the protagonist refuses, her father won't listen, but she needs a chance to free herself from her father and Li Ji-ho. The Duke and his daughter enter the room. The king says he's been waiting for him, and the Duke must know why he's come to see him. The man asks how he could know, since he is not a mind reader. His Majesty comes to the subject and says that the Kalai Expeditionary Force has requested a triumphal ceremony. His interlocutor says that they deserve it and should do as they ask. Kroll slaps his hand on the table, causing the tea to spill on the floor, and says that the problem is not that, but who is in the squad. One of the leaders of the greatest merit is their worst enemy from the north, the Marquis of Winterfell. He will get a lot of attention at this ceremony, then the northerners might think too much of him. His Highness asks how one can speak so calmly about such a thing. The Duke says that he doesn't have to worry about that, because he will shift the focus of the ceremony to something else. He has a plan to tie the Northmen's hands. The king immediately asks Togo to tell him about it. The protagonist is surprised that the man did not hesitate to take what her father said seriously. No wonder the northerners are not happy. The Duke claims he will bind the Marquis in marriage. The king must use his authority and order him to marry. His bride should be the daughter of a nobleman from the south. Then they can prevent him from joining forces with someone from the north. Hearing this, Nadia recalls that after she and Li Ji-ho became married, as a reward for her success in the expedition, the Marquis of Winterfell also got married. Of course, his bride was a girl from the family who was introduced to the king by her father. According to rumors, she cried constantly because of the Duke's cruelty and eventually ran away. The protagonist felt sorry for that girl, who became only a puppet of her father's plans. A realization comes to the Shaitan girl that if she is this girl now, it means she can avoid marriage to the Lord and revenge. But she can't be reckless. It's too early to tell. There is claims that it is a good idea and asks who would willingly give him his daughter. The Duke suggests that the king does not believe in the loyalty of his servants. For the sake of the country, people will certainly give up their daughter. Nadia realizes that this is her chance. She turns to His Highness and apologizes. The girl says that she would like to tell him something. The king allows the protagonist to speak. Her father asks how dare she intrude in the conversation. But the girl ignores this and says that if they need someone who has to go to the enemy camp to the north, she can do it. The Duke is a bit puzzled by this answer. He clenches his fist. Nadia says she is from the Balasite family who have served His Majesty all her life, so she is most trustworthy. She asks to be allowed to marry the enemy for the sake of the king and the welfare of their country. In her thoughts, the girl apologizes to her father for no longer being a pawn in his hands. His Highness repeats the girl's words that she is going to marry the Marquis of Winterfell. The Duke says that his daughter doesn't seem to know what she's talking about and must be unaware of his relationship with Winterfell. His Highness says it's a commendable decision, but as the girl's father and said their families are sworn enemies. Getting someone else to do it will be much easier than marrying Nadia off to him. Bad the Marquis of Winterfell might not take her as his wife. Still, the girl said she had a great idea. Nadia replies that it is so. At this ceremony, she will present a laurel wreath to the Marquis of Winterfell. The Duke reply that his daughter is a fool and asks if she thinks he will accept this wreath from her so easily. The main character claims that no one has turned down the laurel wreath yet. Father puts his hand on his head and replies that they have already planned that the girl will hand the wreath to Lee Ji-ho. The Shaitan girl doesn't know what to say at first, but then says that he won't refuse her. When asked by her father why, she replies that she listened to their conversation while she was making tea and asks if the Marquis himself had requested the ceremony. She argues that there is a point in awarding a wreath, but if someone refuses the wreath, the situation changes. All the attention will be on the poor girl who was denied her recognition. Of course, the hero is the one people love, but the love between the two is far more interesting and exciting. The protagonist says that people will quickly forget his merits and asks if with his own hands he would dare to ruin everything he had strived for, so he will accept the wreath, and then. His father doesn't let the Shaitan woman finish her sentence and says that His Majesty can influence him to not be able to refuse, then he will have no choice. The daughter claims it is true and tells His Majesty to insist on the marriage under the pretext of the plea of the official's daughter. Then he will become a magnanimous ruler who only wants to make the noble lady's love a reality. The king says it's a devious plot, but is very convincing. Still, he's a little worried because he has to send the Duke's daughter to the enemy camp, so he decides to ask the Duke first what he thinks about it. The father claims he had no idea his daughter had such a wonderful plan and decides that his daughter will present a wreath to the Marquis of Winterfell at this ceremony. But from the way he clutches his hands in his lap, you can tell he doesn't want that. After His Highness left, Karain claims that she knew her sister was stupid, but she didn't think she was that stupid because she did it all knowing who the Marquis was, so she volunteered to go north even though she knew he was their enemy. The younger sister asks her father to say something, but he tells her to stop and says it's none of her business. He tells Nadia to explain what she was thinking in suggesting such a thing. After all, he made it clear exactly what her role was. The man asks if his daughter dared to disobey orders. Though the protagonist has His Majesty's permission, if she can't convince her father, she will lose again, so she must make the right move. The girl states that she has no desire to marry a stranger whose origins are unknown, even though she has half Balasite blood running through her. The Duke asks if it's just because of this, for because of her unnecessary pride, they must now give all honor to the Marquis of Winterfell. The brown-haired girl is frightened, but realizes she no longer wants to live as a pawn. She argues that her father should be allowed to experience it just for a moment. The daughter asks if it is more important to prevent a possible mutiny, which is the reason they tried to take people's interest away from the ceremony. The father asks how she knew. The girl realizes she hit the bullseye. The reason why her father reacts so strongly to the glory of the Northmen is because the imperial family is now, without exaggeration, a puppet of the Duchy of Balasite. In other words, this is exactly what father has been seeking for so long. He has the king himself in his hands, but at the same time, he has the most vulnerable position. There have been many occasions when, in such violent times as these, the heads of provinces have mutinied. That's why father is worried. The Marquis is threatening his position. The protagonist realizes she has to dig deeper into what he fears. She argues that even if not at this ceremony, they will still secretly gather. Whoever gets all the glory must watch them, and this ceremony is the best place for such a thing. They will give the animal that is thirsty for water a drink and put a collar on it. The Duke is interested in such a story. Nadia goes on and says that if she marries the Marquis of Winterfell, they will be able to learn more quickly about the changes in the north. Thanks to the sacrifice of the shawl girl, they will be able to strengthen their position. The girl asks her father to let her do it for the sake of their family. The man thinks it does make sense. This expedition didn't go as he expected because of the success of the northerners. They are forced to have a ceremony. But if Nadia travels north as Winterfell's consort, they can learn of their movements more quickly. It's a good chance to place a spy in his entourage. The Duke agrees with his daughter and says they will do as she wishes. Karain didn't expect this answer. She asks her father if he will really send her sister to the north, and asks what about Lord Lee Ji-ho. After all, he wanted to give Nadia to him. The man tells his daughter to be quiet. He can find him a new bride. The Duke turns to his older sister and asks what she really wants. He knows very well that the girl is not doing this for him and asks what she wants for her sacrifice. The protagonist realizes that so far she has been able to deceive him. Now all she has to do is answer that question correctly. She claims she wants freedom. One day her father will defeat his enemy, Winterfell. The brown-haired girl asks her father to let her live as a rich widow then. Unmarried girls are condemned by society, but widows and divorcees are not. Nadia states that even if she doesn't remarry, she no longer wants to carry their family name. She does not want to be tied to anyone. The girl desires a normal life and asks if her father can promise her that. After such a tense conversation, the protagonist walks out into the hallway. The deal was a success. The very first day she went back in time, she was able to avoid marriage with Lee Ji-ho. Nadia looks out the window and sees a maid shouting that they are at fault and asking her to believe her. The older maid orders her to be quiet and asks her how she dared to touch her mistress's things. The maid, captured by the knights, looks at her mistress and screams that she did not steal anything. She begs the protagonist to do something. But the Shaitan girl doesn't seem too thrilled about it, since she was the one who set the maid up. In the morning, the protagonist took the jewelry from the drawer and attached it to the maid's dress. She realizes that Karen's puppet has been kicked out. She had been given a chance to handle everything on her own. Though Nadia was far from revenge yet, she needed to detail her future plans. While she was making plans to destroy the Duchy of Balasite, it was time for the ceremony. A servant informs the Marquis that the preparations for the ceremony are complete and asks him to lead the squad as they set off. Flower petals flew everywhere to congratulate the troops on their victory. Watching the soldiers marching in marching formation, people cheered them. The main character realizes that everything is exactly the same as it was in her previous life. From the clothes and jewelry she's wearing now to the seats everyone is sitting in. If the girl didn't interfere, everything would go on just like it did in her previous life. The younger sister looks at her jewelry in Nadia's hands, asking what her sister would do if a crack appeared on her pendant. She claims she borrowed it because it was her father's orders. Once the ceremony is over, the girl must put it back. The protagonist thinks about how Karain claimed to have lent her own mother's jewelry to her, but she doesn't have the energy to answer her. In the past, the brown-haired girl always tried to please her, but now she doesn't care about her little sister because she's bound to run away from it. The Duke puts up his hand and tells her to stop, for the troop will be arriving soon. He tells his daughter to get ready, try not to screw up, and present the wreath to Glen Winterfell with dignity. There was only one thing that made the ceremony from a past life different from today's. The main character she was presenting, the Marquis of Glen Winterfell, with the wreath. The main character looks at the man behind him. It's Lee Ji-ho, the one who should be the hero of this ceremony, her ex-husband. Even though they didn't marry for love, there seemed to be some kind of connection between them. The girl remembers him saying that to make it look like the marriage never happened. There is only one way, but the upcoming banquet to give Nadia alcohol and medicine and then put a hired man to her, and after she wakes up to call people. The brown-haired girl's heart was beating so fast right now. The king announces that for the knight's exploits, he will give them glory. They reply that they are honored. His Highness states that he has heard that Winterfell was especially honored on this expedition. Upon hearing this, his heart felt very warm. The Marquis apologizes and says the rumors are exaggerated. The king tells the man to set aside his modesty. Looking at him, he recalls the past ruler of Winterfell. He, too, was a distinguished knight. The man says that Glaine's loyalty to Winterfell is commendable, and if his bedridden father were to learn of his exploits, he would definitely be pleased. The Marquis doesn't answer anything. The protagonist realizes that the most painful topic for the Marquis of Winterfell has to do with his father, but His Highness brought it up anyway. The king says he should reward the guy's family for their loyalty, but the guy says it's enough for them that his Kai society knows about it. The ruler says the young ones are very serious at this time. By order of the king, the official ceremony has begun. His Highness announces that they are all gathered here today to congratulate the heroes on their victory in the Kalia expedition. Immediately afterward, the greeting of the families began, and the Duke of Balicet was the very first to meet the Marquis of Glen. He congratulated the young Lord of Winterfell and extended his hand. The lad replied that he had inherited the title and was now a Marquis. Glen argues that if the Duke's memory is failing him, he should leave his post and rest. The man pulls his hand back a little and says that he was wrong, but though Glen became a Marquis at such a young age, there is still much he lacks. Glen asks what could be difficult for a man in his prime. The Duke says that the boy doesn't really resemble the Marquis of yesteryear in his fervor. Then he ahs and says that it's about a man who had an accident, and he's really sorry. It's time to hand over the gifts prepared for the heroes. Nadia comes out with the bouquet and is happy that it's finally her turn. The girl holds the wreath in her slender hands and heads toward the knights. Marquis realizes why his enemy happily agreed to hold the ceremony. He decided to change the essence of the ceremony. Then, the owner of Togo Wreath must be Li Ji-ho. After all, anyone knows that her father supports him. Glen thinks that this ceremony was originally just for himself, so he should just skip it quietly. Come to think of it, this expedition took longer than the guy thought it would, the Marquis suggests. There must have been a mountain of things to do back home. It would be nice to pay them handsomely as a reward. Glen opens his eyes and sees Nadia standing in front of him with a laurel wreath. He doesn't understand why Baliceth's daughter is standing in front of him. He thinks the girl is worried because of the large number of people. Marquis bends over to the protagonist and whispers that she made a mistake due to excitement. He points his finger at the guy with black hair standing behind him, claiming it's Li Ji-ho. Glen suggests the girl to slowly walk that way, and everyone will turn a blind eye to her small mistake due to excitement. But Nadia doesn't budge. She claims she's not wrong. The Marquis asks the girl what she's talking about. The brown-haired woman says that the Marquis of Winterfell has been on her mind for a long time. She holds out a laurel wreath to the boy and asks him to accept it. The crowd begins to gossip, but the girl continues to say that she fell in love with Glen at first sight as soon as she saw him, and felt that he was the one who could take care of her for the rest of her life. The head of Winterfell didn't expect this. He leans over to the lady and asks if she knows what it means when an adult girl hands a wreath to a man. The protagonist realizes that the guy is a lot rougher than they say he is. Nadia assures that she knows, and now she confesses her love. His Majesty turns to the Marquis of Winterfell. He states that the beautiful lady is waiting and asks why the guy is silent. Glen says he doesn't deserve that wreath and can't accept it. He has no idea what's going on, but the guy doesn't like it. He can't fall for it. The protagonist was ready for such a reaction because he will not accept it so easily. She apologizes to the Marquis ahead of time and thinks that it will also be profitable for him to marry her. The girl realizes that there is nothing to be done and will have to push a little. The Shotten woman grabs the man by the sleeve and tells him that if he is worried about her being the daughter of a concubine, he can just accept the wreath and not worry about her. Nadia plans to elicit pity from the people first, and she succeeds. The Marquis turns to the protagonist to ask what she is talking about. But the pillars are immediately heard indignant why the Marquis does not accept the wreath, the commoners claiming that he is putting the young lady to shame. They ask if he is repaying his anger at the young lady because of his disagreement with the Duke. The folk urge the lad to accept Lady Balicite's sincere love. The Marquis realizes that his enemies wanted to ruin the ceremony with his own hands. The guy grabs the bouquet and states that this is a long conversation and they will continue later. He turns around and leaves with the laurel wreath. The protagonist realizes that she has succeeded. She sighs with relief because she has been able to change the future. The Duke and his daughters go to the carriage. He says that Nadia did well. It was worth it. To see Glen's confused face, He has no choice but to accept the offer. The eldest daughter smiles and replies that he doesn't have to thank her. Suddenly, there's a shout. It's Lord Lee Ji-ho. He shouts that he needs to talk to the Duke urgently. The man asks what's wrong and says that the guy must be tired after coming all this way and wonders why the Lord is not resting. Lee Ji-ho says he has to ask the Duke something urgently. The guy heard that Lady Nadia was supposed to present a wreath to him at today's ceremony and asks what happened. The main character looks at her father and wonders if he told him in advance. The Duke realizes what he's talking about and says that it was an emergency, so he couldn't inform Lee Ji-ho. The man apologizes and says he'll find a better match for the Lord, so he shouldn't be upset. The boy shrieks that he didn't come to the man to look for a new bride. He wants to know why the Duke changed his plans. The blonde replies that there was a reason, and this is not the place to talk about it. The Lord cringes at whether the Duke thinks this is too much. Before he joined the army, a similar incident occurred. The father cries out, pointing at the guy. What does he want now, since the ceremony has already taken place? The Lord is a little startled. The Duke, calming down, puts a hand on his shoulder and tells him that it was his mistake anyway, since he didn't warn Lee Ji-ho. He asks Togo to believe that he will make it up to him and make it up to him. The blonde asks if the guy understands what he is talking about. The Lord says he does and agrees with the man. The Duke then climbs into the carriage and calls for his daughters. The protagonist notices the look of her husband in her past life. The girl does not understand why he has such an expression on his face, although now it makes no difference to her. Now she doesn't care, because the first one who betrayed her was him. Marquis has returned to his mansion. He is now sitting at his desk and thinking about something. He sighs. The servant turns to his master and says that he has heard that everyone in the marketplace is talking about the ceremony, and that a lady, who is not often seen, has confessed her love to the Marquis. The boy says that his master must react to this, or he will be forcibly married. Glenn, closing his eyes with his hand over his face and saying it's late, tells his servant to read the letter lying on the table. The boy notices that it is a letter from the royal family. After reading it, the servant realizes that, though veiled, they are telling the Marquis to consummate the marriage. Glenn says that's right, and if he continues to refuse, they'll consider it disobedience to the king's order. The boy cries out that this is too much and asks why they are doing this to his lord. For at least this expedition, the Marquis has obediently agreed. What more do they need? The servant claims that, in addition, their land army is steadily paying the taxes, but even so, the government still doubts the Glen. The Marquis assumes that Duke Balasite did it, because he wants to expose him for rebellion. The northern territory where Winterfell is located was not always part of the kingdom. It was subjugated 100 years ago. The north and the south, which differed in culture and much more, could not easily be friends with each other. The northern army defended the border in the north from monsters, which ensured the safety and fertility of the south, but the southerners thought the northerners were wild and scary. So the previous Marquis and Marquess of Winterfell had an accident because of someone's plot, and it's the Duke of Balasite who comes under suspicion the most. From there, the Duke presents the Marquess of Winterfell with a laurel wreath. Glenn says there are two reasons why they want this marriage to take place. First, to stop you from preventing the Northmen from forming an alliance through marriage. And second, send spies into the enemy camp. The servant says it's a great way to find out about a possible rebellion before anyone else. And also, Lord Lee Ji-ho. According to the people at the ceremony, Lady Nadia was supposed to present the wreath to him. They say he was terribly surprised by what happened. Glenn asks if it was meant for him. The servant replies that yes, and he heard that Lady Nadia and Lord Lee Ji-ho had secretly promised to unite their hearts and lives. It seems the plan for Lord Ji-ho was changed in a hurry, but it was never mentioned. The Marquis looks at the laurel wreath and realizes he was right about the wreath being meant for the brunette. He says he has to do what His Majesty wants, or they'll have a good reason to attack. The servant says the girl is the Duke's daughter. Glenn tells the guy not to worry, because no matter how much you look, Nadia is just a beautiful daughter of the Duke. She will not be able to do anything in a foreign land without a single ally. He doubts that the girl will withstand the cold attitude of the servants for at least a week, because it can't be otherwise. She herself will want to return home, and the Marquis will have nothing to do with it. As a result, the Winterfell and Balasite families were united, with the wedding held on Winterfell grounds and the engagement in the capital. After they had quickly sorted out these minor things, a banquet was held at the Balasite mansion to celebrate the arrival of the new family. The nobles who mocked the protagonist continued to gossip and said she had no shame or conscience. The girl's father was enjoying what was happening, but there was no time for Nadia to pay attention to them now. A brown-haired woman has asked the Marquis to dance. She must fit the image of a noble woman in love who, burning with love, looks at only one person. The girl sensed something at the ceremony. The Marquis of Winterfell became even more wary of the Balasite family. The protagonist realizes that first she needs to show him that she's not dangerous. Glenn bends the girl over in a dance and asks what she's thinking. But Nadia is not confused and says she was thinking how handsome Glenn is. The Marquis says that the girl calls him by his first name, even though he and she are not close at all. He tells the girl to call him Marquis of Winterfell. The protagonist agrees, but adds Glenn on purpose at the end. The guy lets go of the girl's hands and says that he even wonders if she will be able to smile as brightly in the north. He leaves the protagonist alone, and everyone around starts gossiping. Some say that the girl is poor and asks why she fell in love with a northerner. Others say that she can't lift her head from shame. Nadia, on the other hand, is happy. Finally, the guy is gone. The vein can't squeeze a smile out of herself anymore. The brown-haired girl goes out on the balcony and thinks how hard it is. Her whole body is cramped from forcing herself to smile all day. Someone calls out to the main character. It's Lee Ji-ho. He finally found a girl. Nadia asks what's up and wonders why he came. The guy claims he came because he wants to ask something. The brown girl asks what he wants to ask, and she has nothing more to say to the Lord. The guy asks if she hates marriage with him so much. The protagonist did not expect such a question. The guy continues and asks if it is better for the girl to suffer humiliation and slanted glances, to go to the very center of the enemy camp, than to be with him. Nadia says that she knows what the brunette is talking about, because from the beginning it was not clearly decided that they would get married. Lee Ji-ho says that the Duke has already told him everything. Plans changed at the girl's request. The brown-haired girl replies that then she has nothing more to say, but the Lord doesn't back down. He asks if he's not worthy of hearing the truth, and so only that he's a stranger and his origins are unknown. Nadia doesn't understand what's wrong with him, since he was the one who betrayed her first. She clenches her fists and says that the Lord wasn't happy about their marriage. The guy asks when he said that, but the princess says she's not stupid. Ji-ho was worried about being discriminated against because of his background and asks if that's why he wanted to marry a girl from a noble family. Nadia claims that she is only a throwaway, and if the guys offered to marry Karain, he wouldn't hesitate for a second. Ji-ho is surprised at such a question and doesn't answer anything. Just as the red-haired girl thought, he can't answer anything. So those words of Karain were true. What was the girl waiting for? The lady says they aren't right for each other, so she suggests they go their separate ways. She leaves the Lord alone. The girl comes to the garden. She thinks that at least here she can be alone, but at the same moment she hears someone's footsteps. It turns out to be Karain. She asks if they can talk. The protagonist asks why her sister has come here, and in her thoughts she is sad that she can't be alone for a minute. The golden-haired girl pokes her sister in the forehead and asks why she's following a man around and dishonoring their family. It's not like she thinks Karain will just tolerate it. The lady claims that as the true daughter of the family, she has a duty to warn Nadia. She asks if she was jealous that her father only cared about her younger sister and wanted his attention, so she went along with it. Karain calls her sister a poor thing and states that no matter how hard she tries, she will still be a pawn. The brown-haired girl smirks and agrees with her sister. She asks if Karain has thought about the fact that they aren't so different. She failed to marry Lord Ji-ho, so now it's the golden-haired lady's turn. Little sister is furious at Nadia and claims that she is the Duchess's daughter. Shoten asks if her sister still believes her father, as his daughter is just a means to an end for him. Karain is furious and asks how dare she classify her as such scum and if she is laughing at her now. The girl threatens that she will tell her father everything, but Nadia's gaze is directed to Karain's neck, where her mother's necklace hangs. The little sister notices that the girl is looking at her mother's jewelry. She takes it off and asks if it is the jewelry that Nadia's mother got from her father. The golden-haired lady claims that he gave it to her because he thought she would give birth to a son. A girl came along and the shawl didn't deserve it. She asks if the girl wants to take it back. If so, have her kneel down and belittle her. Karain orders her to repeat after her the words that the girl is sorry for behaving so recklessly towards her and will never annoy her little sister again. The golden-haired lady states that if the one pleads convincingly, she will forgive or just get rid of it. After all, she has many such trinkets. You might as well throw one away. She began to hold her hand with the necklace over the pond. The protagonist is furious. Her sister asks if she wants to. If so, there is nothing to be done. The girl is getting ready to throw the necklace into the pond. But the brunette stops her and asks if her sister will really give it to her if she gets on her knees. The sister assures her that she will. She thinks that Nadia has nothing to do. Such a quiet girl suddenly starts to show herself and annoy her. Now she will learn her lesson. Anyway, the golden-haired lady is not going to return the jewelry. She orders the protagonist to bend her knees faster because she is generous if you ask nicely. The brown-haired girl wastes no time throwing her sister into the pond, even in shock, and angrily screams if Nadia has lost her mind and what the hell is she doing, because she doesn't think Karain will let her get away with it. The protagonist asks what will happen if she doesn't. She holds the jewelry in her hands and claims that the golden-haired lady wouldn't give it back no matter how much she begged. She holds the jewelry in her hands and claims that the golden-haired lady wouldn't return it no matter how much she begged. The protagonist says she thought about it a lot as a child, where her sister got so much hatred for her. She wondered if Karain would recognize her as her sister if she did as she said, but realized that her little sister hates her for no good reason. So now she has given Karain a real reason to hate her. The golden-haired lady doesn't recognize her sister. In her mind, she asks if this is the Nadia she knew. She gets goosebumps. Her sister is like a different person. People came running to the screams. They started yelling that the person was in the water and they needed to get something to cover her as soon as possible. One of the guys puts his jacket on the lady and asks if she is okay. The Duke rushes outside to ask what his daughters are making a fuss about in the middle of the night. Karain immediately rushes into her father's arms with tears in her eyes. She screams that it's that dirty girl and points at Nadia. She thinks that her sister is finished. The Duke asks if it is true. Karain is sure that the girl will not go away because she has proof. But the protagonist only laughs at such words. She covers her mouth with her hands so that no one will notice it. The brown-haired girl turns to her sister and says that despite all her hate, how can you lie like that? She didn't listen to her and went to the edge anyway, and she did say it was dangerous there. Nadia claims she was only trying to get her out of there and asks if her sister is afraid of being thought badly of, but her lies dishonor their family more. The golden-haired lady claims that it was Nadia, her sister, who threatened her with her mother's necklace, and the girl pushed her. Some of the people start whispering about threats. They say since she threatened the necklace, she has a bad temper. They wonder why the first daughter's mother's heirloom is in the second daughter's possession and wonder if she is more loved in the duchy. Karain says she isn't and tries to straighten herself out, but the Duke puts his hand on her shoulder and says she's cold. She'd better get back to the common room before she catches a cold. He thinks that if he leaves this case, word will get around among the rumors. The golden-haired lady is indignant that this is unfair. She asks him to listen to her. The father only shouts to the servant to take Karen to her room. He tells the guests that there has been a little quarrel between the sisters, and he is sorry it happened on such a bright day. But the men leave and continue gossiping on the way. They claim that Balasite's noble daughter has dishonored the family so much. One of the ladies says she knew it would happen someday, and she'll keep quiet for a while. Friction notices that her father has not sided with Karain, contrary to what she expected. But it didn't matter to her now because she had gotten her mom's necklace back and now she could safely leave the place. The Marquis and his knights are in the woods near the lands of Winterfell, one of the knights calls out to his lord. Glenn argues that the man is too noisy and should return to his seat. Fabian, on the other hand, tells the Marquis not to be like that. He will only ask a few things in return, though it is a figurative question. The servant asks if the lady's confession wasn't sincere, and the guy kicks his servant with his foot at the same moment. The Marquis states that if the lad is going to continue to talk such nonsense, then let him get lost. Fabian says that you know she's deceiving his master too. But looking at her face during the ceremony, it seemed to him that she was sincere, and the guy isn't really sure if she was lying. Glenn tells his servant not to trust appearances. Nadia is the Duke's daughter. She could stab him in the back at any moment. He suggests Fabian only look at her devotion. He ponders if it is really to help their family in hard times, or if the girl only plans to spy on them. The knight realizes that his lord is right. The Marquis says that if the lad understands, let him go back to his seat. After all, he is the girl's guard and must be careful. If she has a problem, it will be a headache. Fabian walks back to the carriage. He thinks goes glad he is with her after what he heard. This worries him even more. The protagonist looks out of the carriage and tells her attendant that she wanted to talk to him, but the knight is missing, so she had to wait. Fabian almost faints from this. He says that he had a little business to attend to, but he hopes that the girl did not hear their conversation. Nadia says she heard the guy's assigned guard and asks what his name is. The servant says his name is Fabian Knox. The Shaitan girl compliments him, saying it's a beautiful name. The lad looks away and thanks his mistress. The girl looks at Fabian and states that just as she thought, the guy is uncomfortable with her. The knight realizes he was too obvious. The protagonist claims to understand because everyone knows that the Balasite and Winterfell families are enemies. Nadia assures him that her feelings for the Marquis are real. Fabian doesn't know who to believe anymore. He remembers Glenn's words about not judging by appearance. The knight waves his hands and says he's just very shy. The boy asks if this is the first time his mother has been to the north and offers to tell him about the north while they ride. The brown-haired girl thanks Fabian. She was just bored. The protagonist thinks what a relief it is. It seems she has managed to break through the younger knight's barrier. After the story, Nadia falls into slumber. The girl wakes up from a knock on the window. Opening the window, she sees her knight. He offers the lady to go out for a while. After all, they have arrived at Winterfell Mansion. The brown-haired girl, of course, knew that the preparations for the wedding ceremony were in a hurry, but did not expect this at all. Rumors claim that this wedding dress was brought by Glenn's mother before the wedding was not long before the wedding, so it was decided to choose it. The maid claims that the girl may have already heard, but there's an influx of monsters and a bad harvest season in the north right now, so people aren't at their best, because of which a modest wedding ceremony is planned. The maid states that of course a wedding is once in a lifetime, but the protagonist doesn't let her finish her sentence and says that it's okay. She understands. The maid is shocked by such an answer. She asks again what her mistress said. Nadia says that as long as she's with Glenn, it doesn't matter how big the wedding is. She smiles warmly and says that besides, she's a marquis now, so she should think of her people. A woman approaches the brown-haired girl. She says that since the girl thinks so, she can be at ease. The lady hopes that Nadia will always think that way. The main character greets Mistress Grace. Grace Ground is the aunt of Glenn Winterfell. The previous marquis has already died and the previous marquis is bedridden, so she is now the oldest mistress in the family. The woman claims that this dress suits Nadia very well. She says that when Glenn sees it, who will go crazy? The protagonist thanks the lady and tells her that she would be pleased. The lady with silver hair approaches the girl and takes a strand of her hair in her hand. She tells Nadia that because of her father, Glenn is even rude to her, but assures her that there is nothing to worry about because the brown girl is so beautiful that Glenn will eventually open his heart to her. The mistress says she will help, and the protagonist only needs to focus on opening his soul. The lady knows what mistress wanted to tell her with those words. Grace knows that the Marquis has not yet recognized Nadia. The protagonist smiles warmly and says she will remember that. Then Glenn's aunt says she has to go, and in farewell asks if the girl knows what is the most important thing in seduction. She suggests to prepare well. Only one thing comes to mind for the redhead: the first wedding night. She thought they would want to touch her, so she would refuse to spend the night together. But what if this man offered to stay together for the night? Now, the main character in a wedding dress is heading to her fiancé. Well, the girl cannot stop thinking about the conversation with Mrs. Grace. She constantly thought about it. The idea that they could sleep together in any way did not get out of her head. The bride and groom were to say their vows, but all that was on the girl's mind was whether they would sleep in the same room right after the wedding ceremony. Glenn is asked if he takes Nadia Balasite as his wife and vows to love her forever. The Marquise answers yes. When Nadia asks if she will take Glenn Winterfell as her husband, the girl keeps wondering if the Marquis will want to stay in bed with her because he hates her so much. But what if he really wants to do that? What will she do then? The shawl didn't expect that. When the main character is called out a second time, she realizes what is happening now and answers yes. Then they are told to seal their vows with a kiss. The girl was only thinking about how they would share a room. The kiss completely slipped her mind. The Schatten girl realizes that it must be. The Marquis will pretend that they are kissing. What sharing a room can we talk about? But Glenn kisses the girl for real, and they are declared husband and wife. Nadia is shocked because the Marquis really kissed her. The same day in the evening, the Schatten girl wanders around the room and does not know what to do and how to be. The girl is running out of time, and her fiancé is coming soon. She wonders if they will really sleep together. He really kissed her, but the girl's thoughts are interrupted by Glenn, who walks into the room. Nadia realizes that he really came. The girl says that she was waiting for him, but her thoughts are not calm. She thinks about what to do and how to be because she can no longer run away. The Marquis tells her not to be mistaken. He claims that he will never contact the Duke of Balasite's daughter and has only come to tell her in person. The protagonist asks her husband to wait, but he ignores her request and simply leaves. The maids notice sobs coming from their mistress's room. The girl says her feelings are genuine, so why is Glenn so cruel? Sitting on the floor of the room, she sighs with relief and thinks how good it is that he left. The protagonist in her thoughts hopes that he never changed his mind. The girl sees a plate with wine and appetizers on the table. She remembers that today she didn't even eat normally. The Schatten girl starts eating. She notices that the beef jerky is very tasty and so is the wine. Then she decides to try the fruit. Nadia lies down in bed and thinks how good it is. She has nothing to worry about, and the bed is so soft it seems that she is going to fall asleep. The next day, the maids are gossiping among themselves, one of them asking if they have heard about what happened yesterday. The gentleman left their mistress's room at once without staying even 5 minutes. He was very angry. The other says that she had bet that he would not come to her at all. Another maid asks what happened afterward. The girl with the one-time hair assumes they probably had a fight, and Nadia should be ashamed now. Another maid comes up behind them and says she heard the mistress crying for a long time. According to another maid, the mistress's maid, she looked like an unrequited girl in love who had been rejected. When the maid came to the protagonist, the maid apologized and said she couldn't sleep without alcohol. The servants thought she would act arrogant, but still the master couldn't do otherwise after all. The girls are about to leave the room and continue their work. The Marquis and 2 knights are watching all this from around the corner. One of them tells his lord to make the maids keep their mouths shut. The other agrees and says it must be done by any means necessary. Glenn says they don't have to do that. They should just turn a blind eye. He asks if the boys think the maids will love her and what Nadia is doing now. The knight replies that she has officially become a Marquis, and shouldn't she be looking after the household? The Marquis asks if he says the girl has fully started spying on them. He turns to Fabian and claims that he is her guardian, and the guy asks if his master wants him to keep an eye on her. Glenn replies that he does. The boy should watch if the shawl does anything suspicious. If she sends letters to her parents' house, the knight should always be by her side and report everything to the Marquis. The protagonist asks if Glenn has sent a knight to guard her. Fabian replies that there are attacks and he will take care of his mistress from this day forward. Nadia wonders if the Marquis is angry that she is following him. The girl folds her arms and says with a bright smile on her face that she is very happy that her husband cares for her so much. The brown-haired girl says that the Marquise thought the girl would be uncomfortable with strangers and sent Fabian. What a good man he is. The knight replies with a strained smile that that is exactly what happened, but he came to watch over Nadia, not to guard her, and the girl is so happy that he is even ashamed. The knight informs him that he will be waiting at the door, and his mistress can go about her business in peace. The protagonist realizes that her fiancé has decided to watch her all day long. She needs to somehow convince him that she is not a spy. The girl asks the butler to bring the household book. Gordon obeys his mistress, and in a minute she is sitting with it in her hands, clearly surprised. Nadia asks why they have so much debt. She knew in her past life that the situation at Winterfell was not good. This amount is too much. The servant says that this is the peculiarity of the North. Every few years they are attacked by a wave of monsters. Their land is very depleted, so there are no resources, and no attractions either. Nadia asks if they don't get a reward from the king for massacring monsters every year and what the funds are used for. The butler replies that it is thanks to that money that they have been able to make it to this day. And moreover, the Marquis has recently taken part in the Kalia expedition. The Shaitan girl claims that this is why they are not allowed to take part in expeditions anymore. She didn't even know that war requires so much money. The servant claims that they didn't want to get involved, but someone demanded that they do their duty. Gordon realizes what he just said. The protagonist asks if he means her father. The girl tilts her head back in her chair, and I think that anyway she has prepared a plan on how to make money. But she didn't think the amount of debt was so big. She wonders how the Marquis of Winterfell paid off his debts in his past life. The butler states that he has a good solution. After all, she is now part of the Winterfell family too. He asks to be allowed to speak plainly and argue that such difficult times for her new family, if the girl is using the dowry to pay off debts, won't she help with that? The Shaitan thought why he gave her the seal from the warehouse so easily. It means he wants to test her by asking her to solve the financial problems. Gordon asks if the Marquis wouldn't be happy if she helped. However, Nadia says she can't. The butler asks her mistress to think again. The protagonist asks him to understand that she is not saying this because she doesn't want to help the Winterfell family. Looking at the cost book, it is clear that every year the debt is slowly growing. Earlier, the servant said that the reason is the peculiarity of the North. So the dowry of the Duke's daughter will not solve this issue in the long run. Eventually, the debt will reappear and grow. Butler doesn't know what to say to that. After a couple seconds, he tries to straighten up and asks, "Isn't this a desperate situation for their lands right now?" The brown-haired woman slams her hand on the table and states that they will fix the peculiarity of their territory. The servant doesn't understand what his mistress is talking about, and the latter begins to tell him how to accomplish this. When the knight returns to the Marquis, Glenn asks if his wife said she can't use a single coin from the dowry. Fabian argues that she did not. He repeats the protagonist's words that rather than paying off the debt right now, it is better to start increasing the dowry. The other knights say that the guy is naive and believes Nadia since she only seems nice. One of the knights cries out that however she said she would not give her dowry. Fabian says the girl looked serious when she talked about the land's financial situation. He asks his master if he can trust my wife to be followed by such a tightwad. The other, pinning his co-worker with his arm, says how poor their youngest is. Glenn tells them all to go back to their seats because they're making too much noise. The main character at this time walks down the corridor. She sees that there is a pile of things that need to be solved. There are cobwebs hanging in the corners of the estate and statues sprayed. From her thoughts, the Shaitan woman is pulled out of her thoughts by someone's screams. One man screams, "Does the butler not know how long they've been waiting?" Gordon tries to calm them down. Going a little lower, the lady asks her servant what is going on here. One of the guests asks if this is the Duke of Balasite's daughter. Nadia asks them to call her the Marquis of Winterfell. The man apologizes for the late introduction and says he is Shylock. Another claims to be Wayne of the Northern Traders Alliance. The woman behind him also introduces herself. She says her name is Katerina, and we have a trading company called Krita. The protagonist tells them to leave the formalities and say what was talked about here. Shylock says that in that case, they can tell her something. He shouts for the lady to give them the money. The day of repayment of the Marquis's loaned funds is coming soon. Nadia is shocked, but the guy keeps shouting. He says he heard the girl bring an impressive dowry. If she says she can't pay her debts this time, they will take the wind-shaded plane that was left as collateral. The protagonist, realizing it's the only fertile land in this depleted territory. She remembered how the Marquis paid off his debts in his past life. He just gave them this land. The girl asks when the day of repayment of debts will come. Gordon answers that it will happen in 3 months. The brown-haired girl realizes that if the plane is taken away, the Winterfell family will be completely impoverished. No matter how powerful an army the Marquis has, no matter if he has no finances, he will not be able to become the head that unites the North. Nadia asks to give them 2 more months. If they postpone the debt repayment for another 2 months, she will resolve the issue. Shylock says he knows that the girl has brought an impressive dowry with her and asks why she needs 2 extra months. Nadia confidently replies that she is using her dowry for business. The man asks what it all means, and instead of paying off her debts, Madame is going to start a business. The Marquis states that the Winterfell family has close ties to the traders from the northern regions. It would be nice if they would consider a long-standing friendship with them and help in creating a better future for Winterfell. She says she will never forget their help. Of course, if the business fails, they will take the land they left as collateral. The merchants realize that they lose nothing then. Shylock claps and states that he admires the wisdom of Mistress. He is ready to give an answer right now, but he needs to discuss it with the other merchants. He asks if the girl will wait. The main game, and doesn't say she is willing to wait as long as she wants. The merchant bows and thanks. He says he will be sure to give an answer that she will like. With a wicked grin on his face, he leaves the estate. The man wonders if the business of the girl who has lived her whole life without knowing any troubles will succeed. He's already making plans to take over the best land. Nadia breathes a sigh of relief that they're finally gone. The butler asks what business his mistress was talking about, for if they lose the plane. The lady assures Gordon that there is nothing to worry about. They will return the money as planned. The servant asks why the extra time. The girl replies that she just wanted to talk to him about it. She orders the butler to invite to the mansion all those who want to postpone the day of debt repayment. She will need to buy something from them. Gordon doesn't understand what his mistress wants to buy, but Nadia repeats that she wants to start a business. Not everyone can do really important business. They have to show that they will get someone who trusts them and is willing to wait. When guests arrive at the estate, one of them asks if the business the girl was talking about was the creation of herbal tea from prickly vines. The protagonist calmly says that this is just the way it is, and she is confident of her success. The guests think what nonsense she is talking about. Prickly vine is an herb that only the poor take. There is no value in it. It is a common weed. Nadia asks if they could buy that herb for her in bulk. Wayne and Katerina don't trust this plan. The man says that the price of this herb is quite low, but if the girl wants to buy in market quantities, some capital will be needed and whether she has it or not. Wayne chokes on his tea when he hears that the girl is going to buy weeds with that money. He looks at the butler and thinks that it would be better if the girl bought dresses and jewelry. At least they could be resold. He notices that the butler does not discourage his mistress. He seems to have given up. When the Marquise spoke so confidently last time, Wayne thought she had a good plan, but he didn't think she was so unreasonable. Katerina asks her to forgive her, but she thinks that such a business is not the best option. The protagonist asks why. The woman says that the prickly lasagna is of no value because there are many good herbs to replace it with. And besides, if you take into account the costs of transportation and storage, they will suffer great losses. Nadia says they're wrong about something. She didn't invite them here for discussion, but for hiring them. The girl is willing to pay them more than usual. They will definitely not suffer any losses. The guests look at each other and reply that if the Marquis says so, they will contact all the trading firms on the continent. He thinks that there will be no problem in securing the right amount of goods. The brown-haired woman smiles and says that all hope is only in them. They should take care of everything without exception. 2 months later, Grace comes into the Marquise's room, rants about what she heard, that Nadia still hasn't taken care of anything, except her useless weed, and asks if Glenn will continue to watch her do nonsense. The Marquis claims that she started this business of money from her dowry, and he has no right to interfere with her. The aunt assures him that the protagonist has no financial literacy since she believes that weed will bring her money, and asks if she can even be trusted with the household, soon to be a full day of debt repayment. The Marquis puts down his quill and turns to his aunt. Grace says something about not watching her tongue, but asks Glenn to remember one thing. She said it because she is thinking about the family's future. Stalin remains by himself in his office and thinks about the day of debt repayment. Suddenly, he hears someone running. Gordon bursts into the office and asks if his master has heard the news. Glenn rises from his chair and asks what kind. The butler, breathing hard running, says they are saved and they won't have to give up the plane. He claims it's all thanks to Madame. The Marquis can't believe his ears. In a village in the south, 2 guys are talking about how a girl died recently. Her arm was all numb, and eventually the girl got the plague. One of the boys asks if it was just her, because there hasn't been a day in the last few months when they haven't burned a corpse. Not only their village is suffering, but all the lands in the kingdom starting in the southern territories. He asks when they will find a cure. Suddenly, a man comes to the boys and asks if they have heard the news, because they have finally found a cure for the plague. It is a tea made of thorn vine herbs. They say it can be used to cure the plague. When the merchants heard the news, they immediately decided to buy thorny vine herbs, but someone has already bought it all up. Now the protagonist is looking at the villagers who are buying thorny vines. Fabian tells them to take their time because there is a lot of merchandise. The woman says she was very worried that her daughter would die. She is thankful that they sold so cheaply because usually in such cases the price is very high, so the poor can't afford it. Knight claims it's all thanks to the Marquise's generosity. She made sure everyone could be cured. A decree has been issued to start supplying herbal tea at an affordable price, otherwise from areas where the situation is more serious. Raising the price or reselling or stockpiling herbs was forbidden. Everything was done to reduce losses among the poor. Now Nadia is standing on the bridge talking to Wayne. The man tells the lady about his worries that the southern territories will think that they have monopolized all the medicine in the north so that they will have an epidemic. The Marquesa assures me there's little chance of that. First of all, it was not Winterfell that bought up all the vines, the author says, standing in front of her. Besides, the girl is the daughter of the Duke of Balicet of the south. The prickly vine grass was sold faster than expected. Because of this, the merchants who agreed to wait and helped in the business got a big profit. The debt the girl gave to Katharina was 97,200 gold, and Wayne's debt was 10,087. Shylock couldn't believe that she was really giving back. Moreover, she only offered cooperation to those who agreed to wait. Nadia approaches the merchant. She states that it seems the conversation with the other merchants didn't go well, and she was looking forward to a letter from him. She says that if the guests have everything, she will ask only those who helped her with her business to stay. The rest of them can go out. The girl says that she will wait for the day to meet Mr. Shylock again. The merchant says he'll wait too, but until then, let the lady be well. He clenches his fists and walks away. After that, the protagonist comes to her husband. She asks if he believes her now. After multiplying the devotee, she has sorted out the debts. Guy says that she can't see the future, but somehow she knew what was going to happen. Nadia says that when she was in the south, she happened to see a report from the head of the Aral lands in her father's study and assumed that the plague would spread throughout the kingdom. The boy asks, "What about a cure?" Shaitan says that the maid who looked after her as a child used to lead a nomadic life every night, told her about her life, and once told her that the herb thorn vine can help with a deadly disease when fever grips the whole body. Of course, it was all lies. The Marquis apologizes for having misunderstood Nadia. The girl thanks him for saying so. Glenn claims that when the girl said she would pay off her debts after she earned the money, he thought she was lying because... The protagonist doesn't let him finish the sentence and says it's because her father is the Duke of Balicet. The Marquis says he is. He doesn't understand why the girl is helping him. If Nadia's father finds out, he won't like it. Shaitan asks how the Marquis has been listening to her all this time. She claims that she has told him she loves him several times and asks if he remembers what she told him. Glenn realizes that she's back to the love thing. The boy says that whatever the reason, she paid off Winterfell's debts, which means if she has a request, he will fulfill it. The protagonist didn't think he'd suggest it. She'd like to say everything that's on her mind, but she can't right now. The girl holds out her arms and says she wants her husband to hug her once. The Marquis is surprised by such a request. The girl asks if it is too difficult a request. He replies that it is not like that and just thought that she has another wish, for example, that he punish the gossiping maids or ask her to return all the money she has spent over time. Nadia assures him that if she used such tricks, she would never become a Winterfell family man. She asks if it would be better for him to honor the request. Glenn realizes that this is something he can do. He hugs his wife back and pulls her close to him. The guy notices that she smells sweet. Suddenly, someone from the hallway shouts that it's time for the business meeting. Nadia thinks what a relief this is. She was worried about how they would stop hugging. She tells her husband she's sorry, but she has to go. Marquis says it's okay and she can go. As the protagonist leaves the room, she thanks Glenn for granting her wish. She wonders if he trusts her now. A girl comes to her servants. She asks how things are going. The boys reply that, thanks to the double bookkeeping the mistress has taught them, things are going smoothly. Wayne. You say it's the first time he's heard of it? Nadia split the expenses and income into 2 parts, and now it's easier to keep track of the money flow. He asks if the mistress came up with this method herself. The main character replies that she's not that smart and learned it from one man who came from far away. The merchant claims he doesn't know where the man is from, but he's incredible. Nadia says she agrees he knew a lot. The girl recalls how, in a past life, they were sitting with Lee Ji-ho. She asked us what his country was like. The brunette replied that in the world he lived in, women and men could get the same education, and it was common. The main character asked if he was joking. The guy said with confidence that they used the knowledge to start their own business. They were looking for a business they really wanted to do. The brown-haired girl said she wanted to live like that too. Lee Ji-ho put his hand on hers and said that she was very smart, and he was sorry that she had lived in her father's shadow all her life, saying that he wanted her to have a chance to explore her talents. Nadia recalls that every time they met, he told her something new, and thanks to him, she was able to learn to think more broadly. It helped when she went back in time and started making plans, but even so, he dumped the main character to climb to a higher place. Wayne says that Mistress should be careful with Shylock, because he's very cunning and greedy, so he won't give up so easily for anything. Nadia says not to worry about it, because they know who her father hates the most: those who don't pay their taxes on time. The Duke sits in his office and orders a tax audit to be started now on the merchants in the north and find everything on them. When he allowed his daughter to use her dowry for her silly business, he had no idea she would be so successful. The man thinks that something is wrong, and if this can be a mere coincidence, he is already starting to think of betrayal. But the Duke brushes such thoughts away, for how could she know what was unknown to him and come up with such a plan? Nadia was just lucky this time it only played into Winterfell's hands. He clutches the document in his hands and thinks that nothing lasts forever anyway. Time will pass and their budget will be at the bottom again. At this time, the protagonist has already finished repairing the estate. The butler almost cries and claims that it's all thanks to the business of their mistress. He is so grateful to her. The girl not only paid the debt, but also solved the problem with the repair. The Shaitan girl says that their mansion has only become brighter, and that's a good thing. Nadia thinks she can catch her breath now and says she is going to her office. It was hard for a while, but she did what she had to do. She feels much better. On her way out, she tells her Gordon that she has something for him. She points to a bag of money and says it's a special award for the best butler. He's put a lot of effort into building a household that didn't exist. The servant argues that it is too much for him and she should save this money for the future. But the protagonist argues that all this time their lands have existed only because of the servant's hard work. Efforts should be rewarded adequately. Shaitan says there must be vengeance, often was uncomfortable in front of his subordinates because of salary problems. Now he will be able to maintain his authority by paying them. Butler almost cries. He remembers the annual monster waves, constant food problems, and problems in the mansion because of the increasing debts. He can't believe that everything was solved so easily. Gordon informs that his mistress is a miracle sent to him by the ancestors of the family. He will honor and take care of her all his life. The protagonist thanks her subordinate. She didn't think he would be so loyal to her. The knight tells the butler to stop crying. The protagonist realizes that thanks to her successful business, the layers have come to trust her, and she must continue in the same vein to complete her plan. Looking out the window, she notices a red flag and asks what it is. Fabian states that it is a speaker, since the flag is red. It means the message is urgent. Nadia asks why they're so calm since it's an urgent message, if he has any idea what happened. Guy says that the red flag at this time means there's a high probability that Count Alteo has crossed the border. The earldom of Alteo is south of Winterfell. It's not part of the Northern Commonwealth or my father's alliance, it's a third force. The girl understands that relations between neighboring territories can be bad, but judging by the reaction of those two, they are clearly hiding something. The protagonist asks if by saying this time they meant that they do this every year. Apparently, she got caught up in the moment. Winterfell has no money or resources, so their neighbors are crazy since they don't answer. Nadia is sitting with her husband. She says she heard the news that their property is being encroached upon by neighbors. Glenn says that this happens sometimes, and the girl shouldn't worry because he'll be back soon. The brown-haired woman says her husband is going off to the battlefield. How can she not be worried? Marquis looks at her coldly, but then sighs and thinks it would be strange if she didn't worry when her husband goes off to war. It's a normal reaction. Fabian states that his mistress has nothing to worry about. Winterfell's army is the strongest in the north and in the entire kingdom. And the Lord is the strongest warrior in the entire army. Alteo's low-grade soldiers can't be their rivals. Glenn orders his servant to be quiet. The protagonist sees how confident he is and thinks that in that case she has nothing to worry about. Then maybe she should think about what territories to take from her enemies. Well, a sudden realization comes to the girl, because if they always win where the land is, Winterfell, there's nothing else it owns besides the northern territories. The girl asks the knight if wars with Alteo happen often. He says they do. Then the protagonist asks why they didn't take the lands, since there were so many chances. Fabian doesn't know if it's okay to answer that question, but the Marquis says it's because of the fortress. On the battlefield they win, but as soon as they feel threatened, they hide in Baelong Fortress.